Friends, welcome to E-Pathashala in Linguistics. This is the course that concerns with language typology and universals. We are going to discuss Clitics in South Asian languages, part 2. Earlier, in part 1, we have discussed how Clitics, what kind of role Clitics play in disambiguating a sentence. If you recall, we were discussing the role of particles and the scope of negation. What we are going to do is, we will continue the discussion on the scope of negation and the role of particles. Then we are going to discuss verbal clitics. How, by verbal clitics I mean a verbal reciprocal or a verbal reflexive that occurs in South Asian languages. And how the verbal clitics block long-distance binding. And the second point I would like to discuss is the morphological nature of the anaphor. An anaphor can be a simplex anaphor or it may be a complex anaphor. What we are going to argue is, while a simplex anaphor permits long-distance binding, a complex anaphor blocks long-distance binding just as a verbal reflexive or a verbal reciprocal does. Then we will summarize the whole discussion. So let us look at, our contention is that the occurrence of the inclusive particle with the embedded participle blocks the percolation of the negative to the embedded clause, and the embedded clause forms a syntactic island. That is, if you have an inclusive particle with the participle like the conjunctive participle, negatives, the effect of negative cannot go down to the embedded clause. Let us take a sentence from Hindi Urdu. Ravi रिश्वत लेकर ही काम नहीं करता. If you recall, let's go to the sentence without any particle. Ravi रिश्वत लेकर काम नहीं करता. This sentence, as you might recall, is ambiguous. That is, Ravi takes bribes and still does not do the work. Or the other alternative is, the other interpretation is, Ravi does not take bribes and he still does the work. So, when you have a particle such as he, the emphatic, or to, as for, as in sentence number 16, 1, Ravi rishwat lekar hi kaam nahi karta. This means Ravi takes bribes all right, but does not do the work. That is, Ravi does not do the work even though, or in spite of, he is taking bribes. But it does not mean Ravi does not take bribes and still does the work. That is, the kind of ambiguity that we have seen earlier is lost in this sentence. Why? Because the particle blocks the negation percolating down. So, it forms a syntactic island, the embedded clause, and it does not permit any percolation of any item into its island. Now let us look at the focus particle. Recall that the occurrence of the inclusive particle B also, or to, stops the percolation of the negative to the embedded clause, as in 16.1, which I have repeated here. Ravi rishwat lekar bhi kaam nahi karta. So, when you have an inclusive particle, neg percolation is blocked. When you have a focus particle, neg percolation is not blocked. Let us see how widespread this phenomenon is. Let's take the case of Manipuri. Manipuri is a Tibeto-Burman language. It's a Meitei, as it is called. Meitei is the language. So in Meitei, a similar ambiguity arises. Let's look at sentence number 16.3. Tomba paisa jaraga thabak taude. Let me repeat. Tomba paisa charaga thabak taude. Tomba money charaga having eaten, that means having taken. Thabak taude, he does not do the work. So exactly as it is in Hindi, this sentence is ambiguous. Tomba takes bribes and does not do the work, or Tomba does not take the bribe and still does the work. Now let us see what happens when you have a particle, inclusive particle, like also. The moment you have the inclusive particle, the sentence is disambiguated. It has only one interpretation. And the negative, just as in the case of Hindi, Urdu, and many other Indo-Aryan languages, negative does not percolate down to the embedded clause. So this sentence has the interpretation, Tomba takes bribes to and does not do the work. That is, Tomba does not do the work in spite of or even though he takes bribes. But it does not mean Tomba does not take bribes and still does the work. Thus, the addition of su, also the inclusive particle, to the right of the embedded conjunctive participle disambiguates the sentence. Let us look at Telugu, a Dravidian language. Let's take the same sentence as we did in Hindi and Meitei. Ravi lanchalu తీసుకొని పని చెయ్యడు. తీసుకొని is the conjunctive participle, and this sentence is ambiguous, just as it is in Hindi and Meitei. Ravi takes bribes and does not do the work. Ravi does not take bribes and still does the work. Let us see what would be the effect of the inclusive particle kuda. Kuda means also. So, in sentence number 16.6, you will see Ravi lanchalu తీసుకొని kuda pani చేయడు. Let me repeat. Ravi lanchalu తీసుకొని kuda pani చేయడు. So, Ravi bribes having taken to does not do the work. Notice that there is a kun, which is a self-benefactive in Telugu, as we have discussed in the section on anaphora. So Ravi takes bribes to and does not do the work. That is, Ravi does not do the work even though he takes bribes. It does not mean Ravi does not take bribes and still does the work. That is, just as in the case of Hindi, Urdu, and Meitei, the negative, the percolation of the negative to the embedded participle, that is, to the embedded clause, is blocked by the addition of the inclusive particle kuda. Kuda, that is also in Telugu. That is, the moment you have a particle, the inclusive particle, to the right of the conjunctive participle, the embedded clause forms a syntactic island and does not permit any intrusion like the negative particle into it. Let us take another particle, aite, as for aite is a focus particle in Telugu. The occurrence of the focus particle aite does not block neg percolation. That is, if you have aite as for to the right of the conjunctive participle, then the neg which occurs in the higher clause goes down to the lower clause, and the lower clause, in spite of the occurrence of aite as for, does not form a syntactic island. You can see that in sentence number 16.7. Ravi lanchalu తీసుకొని అయితే పని చేయడు. That means Ravi does not take bribes, but he does the work. It does not mean Ravi takes bribes, but he does not do the work. That is the negative has gone down to the embedded clause. Now we move on to section 3, where we discuss the role of verbal clitics. The verbal clitics that we are going to consider are the verbal reflexive and the verbal reciprocal, and how the occurrence of the verbal reflexive or the verbal reciprocal in the embedded clause blocks long distance binding. As you recall, in South Asian languages, we have long distance binding, where the subject of the embedded clause is co-indexed with the matrix subject, violating principle A. We have provided an explanation how this can be accounted for by head-to-head movement in South Asian languages, and it is not a violation of principle A of the binding theory. Now what we are going to see is how the occurrence of a verbal clitic in the embedded clause blocks long distance binding. What are verbal anaphors? Verbal anaphors are reflexives and reciprocals. These are found in Dravidian languages, Munda languages, and many of the Tibeto-Burman languages. And the verbal reflexive or reciprocal functions as a self-benefactive. We are going to, in this context, see how the other benefactive, the addition of the other benefactive to the embedded clause, affects the interpretation. Thus, we are going to consider 3 aspects: the occurrence of the verbal reciprocal, the occurrence of the verbal reflexive, and the occurrence of the self-benefactive or the other benefactive, and see what kind of effect these particles will have in disambiguating a sentence. There are many South Asian languages such as Mizo, Ma, Bodo, Tenediye from the Tibeto-Burman language family, Telugu, Tamil, Kannada from the Dravidian family, and the Munda language in Dravidian family, in which there occurs a nominal as well as a verbal anaphor. That is, by verbal anaphor we mean the verbal reflexive or the reciprocal. And there are languages such as Mundari, Santali, Ho, which only have the verbal anaphor. As you might recall, there is no nominal anaphor at all. So what we are going to show is, that the verbal anaphor in all these languages performs several functions, such as the self-benefactive, the passive marker, an inquisitive marker, etc. Let's come to sentence number 16.8 from Telugu, a Dravidian language. Ashok Saritani tana kosam tea cheyamani cheppedu. Ashok masculine, Sarita feminine, ni accusative, and since the embedded verb is non-finite, so you have a big pro coming there. Saritani tana kosam tea cheyamani, self for tea cheyamani, do imperative ani cheppedu. Ashok asked Sarita to make some tea, where you have an embedded verb cheyamani, which is do imperative, and you have a quotative, and you have Ashok asked Sarita to make some tea for himself. Here, it does not mean tanakosam, the reflexive self for, refers only to Ashok, the matrix subject, and it does not refer to Sarita, which is the embedded subject, which is manifested either as a big pro or a small pro. When Telugu has the verbal anaphor, kon, as you might recall. When you have the verbal anaphor occurring with the embedded verb, then long distance binding, as in the case of 16.8, is blocked. In 16.9, you can see Ashok Saritani tana kosam tea chesukomani cheppadu. Here, the embedded verb is chase, chesu, to do. Kon is the self-benefactive, and you have a quotative occurring there, which occurs to the right of the embedded clause. Ashok asked Sarita to make some tea for herself, and it does not mean for himself. Why? Because the occurrence of the verbal reflexive kun or the self-benefactive kun blocks the interpretation long distance binding, and the anaphor tanakosam could refer or refers only to Sarita and not to Ashok. Telugu, like in many other South Asian languages, has the other benefactive too. The other benefactive in Telugu is pit. Pit means to give away, to serve actually literally, but pit has the meaning of the interpretation of other benefactive as a compound verb. When the other benefactive pit occurs with the embedded verb, the anaphor tanakosam unambiguously refers to the matrix subject Ashok alone, as in sentence number 16.10. Ashok Saritani tana kosam tea chesi pettamani adigadu. The moment you have pit with the verb to do, chase, in the embedded clause, what happens is tana kosam, which earlier referred to Ashok in a sentence without pit, now refers only to Ashok and not to Sarita. That means the occurrence of the other benefactive makes long distance binding of tanakosam self for in Telugu with the matrix subject. Okay. In Mar 2, the verbal reflexive in occurs with the embedded verb, and in Ho and Munda, Ho, a Munda language, the verbal reflexive N occurs with the embedded verb, then they too block long distance binding. Let us take the case of Dakkini, a transplanted variety of Hindi Urdu in the Dravidian language speaking area. And Dakkini does not have a verbal reflexive, nor does it have a verbal reciprocal. But it has a self-benefactive, which is the vector verb lena, to take, of Hindi. And the occurrence of the vector verb lena blocks long distance binding in Dakkini. In 16.11, as you will see, the nominal anaphor, apne liye, ambiguously refers to either Ashok, the matrix subject, or to the matrix indirect object Lalita. So let's take this one. Note that the subject of the embedded clause pro is co-indexed with Lalita, the indirect object. Let's take sentence number 16.11. Ashok ललिता को अपने लिए चाय बनाने को कहा. Ashok asked Lalita to make some tea for himself or for herself. Notice that the embedded verb is chai banana. Banana is the embedded verb make, and banana in the embedded clause does not have any clitic, verbal clitic following it. So Ashok asked Lalita to make tea अपने लिए, for himself or for herself, चाय बनाने को कहा. What happens when you have the self-benefactive lay occurs with the embedded verb? The self-benefactive lay functions the same way as the verbal reflexive or the self-benefactive functions in Telugu or Tamil or Kannada, where long distance binding is blocked and apne liye is co-indexed only with pro, that is the subject of the embedded clause, and not with the subject of the matrix clause. That is, the occurrence of lena, the self-benefactive, with the embedded verb blocks long distance binding, as you can see in sentence number 16.12. Ashok Lalita को अपने लिए चाय बना लेने को कहा. By the way, you would notice, those of you who are familiar with Hindi, notice that there is no ergative case marker with Ashok because the Kini does not have an ergative marker as such. So let me repeat this sentence. Ashok Sarita को चाय बना लेने को कहा. So अपने लिए refers only to Sarita, that is herself, and not to Ashok, that is him. Notice that sentences such as 38 are not acceptable in Hindi, Urdu or Punjabi, as they do not tolerate the occurrence of the verbal anaphor, a vector verb with an infinitive. Let me repeat. The occurrence of a vector verb such as lena, bana lena, with an embedded infinitive is not tolerated, is not permitted, either in Hindi, Urdu or in Punjabi. Recipient position of the embedded clause. It uniquely refers to the matrix subject alone and not to Lalita. The pronoun may also be co-indexed to a discourse antecedent, for which we have used the subscript K in 16.13. Let's look at 16.13. Ashok Lalita को उसके लिए चाय बनाने को कहा. Now, earlier in 16.12, we had अपने लिए. Here we have उसके लिए. अशोक ललिता को उसके लिए चाय बनाने को कहा. That उसके लिए is a pronominal, and it would refer either to Ashok or to a discourse antecedent. Now let's move on to the Tibeto-Burman languages and how the occurrence of the verbal clitics or a verbal clitic either blocks long distance binding or does not block long distance binding. Tibeto-Burman languages have a simplex anaphor as well as a complex anaphor. A simplex nominal anaphor in the embedded clause in AO can have either the embedded subject or the matrix subject or a discourse antecedent as its antecedent, provided the embedded verb does not carry either the self-benefactive or the other benefactive clitic. Notice that AO is a Tibeto-Burman language. Here we are discussing the case of AO Mongsen. There are two other languages of AO. We are not going to AO Chungli. Okay, in AO Mongsen, let's consider a sentence such as 16.14. Akamla na imoba tangko pa atamake sanga yanglu ang tasa. Akumla asked Imo to make some tea for self. This sentence is ambiguous That is, pa atmaka may either refer to akamla or it may refer to imoba. So the sentence has two interpretations, just as it has in Hindi or Dakkini. However, the occurrence of the other benefactive B, the B clitic, blocks local binding, and the anaphor pa can only be coindexed with a long distance antecedent, as we see in the next sentence. That is, the anaphor would have either the matrix subject or a discourse antecedent as its antecedents. 16.15 Akamla na Aranla tanko pa atmaka sanga Yanglu B angta sa. Akamla asked Aranla to make some tea for self. The self refers only to Aranla and just a minute. The self refers only to Akamla and not to Aranla. I'm just repeating. Akamla asked Aranla to make some tea for self. And here, self is pa atmaka, but the occurrence of the verbal self, other benefactive, B, blocks local binding. It permits long distance binding. As a result, pa atmaka refers to akamala only and not to aranla. As you recall, when we were discussing anaphors in South Asian languages, we said that South Asian languages have two types of anaphors, nominal and verbal. In nominals, there are two types. That is a complex anaphor, which is morphologically complex, and is simplex anaphor. So what we are going to show now is long distance binding is blocked when you have a complex anaphor in the embedded clause. That is, if you have a simplex anaphor, then long distance binding is permitted. If you have a complex anaphor in the embedded clause, the complex anaphor cannot have the subject of the matrix clause as its antecedent. This, as you might recall, in all South Asian languages except Marathi, a reduplicated form does not permit long distance binding, while it is the simplex form that permits long distance binding. So, the complex anaphor in South Asian languages is the result of reduplication of the anaphor and case copying, especially in Dravidian and in Tibeto-Burman languages such as Manipuri, where the case copy of the subject occurs onto one of the elements of the bipartite structure of the complex anaphor. Let me repeat. You have a case marker on the subject. The anaphor is a complex anaphor. That means it has bipartite structure. Now the case marker of the subject is copied on to one of the components of the bipartite structure of the complex anaphor. In Hindi Urdu, the complex anaphor apne aap does not permit long distance binding, while the simplex anaphor permits long distance binding, as you can see in sentence number 16.16 and 16.17. In 16.16, the complex anaphor apne aap, which occurs in the embedded object position, can be co-indexed only with the local antecedent, the local antecedent being pro, which in turn is co-indexed with the matrix object, that is indirect object, that is Raja. So let's take this sentence. The minister told the king not to blame himself, that is the king, and in this sentence, मंत्री ने राजा से अपने आप को दोष ना देने को कहा. The minister told the king not to blame himself. Why? Pro is co-indexed with Raja, which is the indirect object, and अपने आप, the complex anaphor, can only refer to Raja and not to Mantri, which is the matrix subject. मंत्री ने राजा से अपने को दोष ना देने को कहा. The minister told the king not to blame himself, or that is the king, or not to blame him, that is the minister. Why this sentence? Why the anaphor can be co-indexed either with the pro, the embedded subject, which in turn is co-indexed with Raja, the matrix indirect object, or Mantri, which is the matrix subject. Why? Because apne ko is a simplex anaphor. A simplex anaphor permits long distance binding as well as local binding, provided your embedded verb does not have any verbal clitic. Here, dena, give, does not have any verbal clitic. So, therefore, you have obviously the embedded anaphor, that is the anaphor apne ko occurring in the embedded clause may either refer to a local antecedent or a long distance antecedent. Recall that in Telugu too, a simplex anaphor permits long distance binding, while a complex anaphor does not permit long distance binding. Let's take sentence number 16.18. In 16.18, the anaphor tanamida self for permits long distance binding. So Karuna Saritato tanamida చిరాకు పడవద్దు అని చెప్పింది. తన మీద self on can be co-indexed with Karuna, or it can be co-indexed with Sarita, which is the embedded which can be co-indexed with Pro, which in turn is co-indexed with Sarita, the embedded indirect object. Let's take 16.19, where you have a complex anaphor. The complex anaphor is tanamida tanu, self on self. It has a bipartite structure. Karuna saritato tanamida tanu chiraku padavaddu ani cheppindi. Karuna Sarita not to get irritated at herself. Herself refers to Sarita and not to Karuna. Thus, what we have noticed is the process of reduplication. Thus, it is the process of reduplication of the anaphor that disambiguates a sentence in 45. This disambiguation process in Telugu is in consonance with similar other processes in other South Asian languages. Recall that a verbal anaphor blocks ambiguity. Hence, long distance binding is not permitted when a verbal anaphor occurs. Similarly, when a complex anaphor occurs, long distance binding is prohibited in all South Asian languages. There are some predicates in Telugu and also in other Dravidian languages that obligatorily require a verbal anaphor. When you have a verbal anaphor in the embedded clause, then the sentence is unambiguous and the anaphor permits only local binding. Malati, as in sentence number 16.20, 2-0 you can see. Malati, Mamatani, Tanani Tanu, Pogudukanavaddu, and Cheppindi. Here, you have two aspects to deal with. You have Tanani Tanu, which is a complex anaphor, and Pogudu is praise, Koni is a verbal reflexive. So you have two features to deal with, namely a complex anaphor in the embedded clause and a verbal reflexive in the embedded clause. As you can guess, this sentence would permit only the co-indexation of the anaphor with the local subject and not with the matrix subject. As you can see, Malati told Mamata not to praise herself, that is Mamata. She can only, it refers only to, not to praise herself, that is Malati. It refers only to Mamata. We have pointed out so far, emphatically, that the verbal clitic blocks long-distance binding. So, if you have a language where you have only the verbal anaphors and not the nominal anaphors, then a language that only has verbal anaphors and no nominal anaphors must permit only local binding and not long-distance binding. Our claim gets support from Munda languages such as Ho or Mundari or Santali, where the occurrence of the verbal anaphor blocks long-distance binding. Where the occurrence of the verbal anaphor in the embedded clause blocks long-distance binding. We have also shown that reduplication has its effects in the interpretation. We have shown the case of sema, relative clauses. You can refer to the modules on relative clauses, relativization in Tibeto-Burman for the cases involving sema. Interestingly, English also has, in colloquial English, one finds sentences such as 16.24a and 16.24b, where reduplication is used as a specific device to disambiguate a sentence and to impart a specific sense. Let's take this sentence. Does he like you? Or does he like you like you? Does he like you has the interpretation of casual, but like you, does he really like you? Or take sentence number B, he's a linguist, which means he is a linguist. In sentence number B, you can see, yeah, he's a linguist, but not a linguist. That is, you have a casual versus the real thing. And these are the data that are supplied by Peter Hook, Professor Peter Hook from American English. Thus, in this unit, we have, in the two modules, that is, the earlier one and in this module, we have demonstrated that clitics, the occurrence of complex forms in contrast to simplex forms, play a significant role in disambiguation and help the speaker in conveying the intended information. This module also highlights the syntactic role that reduplication plays and demonstrates that it cannot simply be restricted to the domain of morphology alone. Reduplication has its implications or ramifications in the syntax of a language. In module 1, in the earlier module, we have also shown the role of syntactic dependency. We have also shown the role of syntactic dependency. The role of syntactic dependency domain demonstrates that the occurrence of the emphatic particle is permitted in sentences with aspectual meaning in Hindi Urdu, as the clitic that is added is in consonance with the total meaning that is being projected compositionally by the individual elements. Thank you.